I'm 28 years old, and for 28 years I never once questioned whose daughter I was. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. My dad, Gary, but I've never called him anything but Dad, taught me how to ride a bike in the church parking lot because our driveway had too much of a slope. He sat in a folding chair outside my dorm room the day I moved into college because he just wanted to make sure the door locked right, which was code for "I'm not ready to leave you here." He cried at my college graduation behind his sunglasses like he thought nobody could tell. I could tell. I always could. So when my doctor said the word hereditary during a routine visit last spring, my first thought wasn't fear. It was almost funny, in a dark way. I'd had some abnormal blood work. Nothing dramatic, just enough that my doctor wanted a fuller picture of family medical history before deciding whether to run more tests. She recommended one of those consumer DNA health kits, the kind that map out genetic risk factors alongside all the ancestry stuff nobody really cares about until they get curious at 1 a.m. It'll also flag any relevant genetic markers your parents carry, she said, like that was a footnote. Might make things easier than tracking down decades of paperwork. I remember thinking, sure, easy. I ordered 2 kits that night, one for me, one for Dad, figuring Mom's side we already had decent records on from her own health stuff years back. Dad thought the whole thing was a little silly. "You already know everything about me," he said, spitting into the tube at our kitchen table while my mom pretended not to watch. "I'm not that interesting, kid." I laughed and told him it was for science, not entertainment. I had no idea I was about to learn exactly how wrong 2 people who love each other more than anything can accidentally be. The results came back to my account first, mine before his, since I'd registered them a few days apart. I opened the health section without thinking twice, half expecting to see nothing more exciting than a note about my slightly low vitamin D or a mild lactose intolerance flag, which, fine, I already knew about. Instead, there was a small, sterile little box near the bottom of the report. Relationship prediction. No genetic relationship detected with uploaded profile, Gary, father. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time, out loud, quietly, to my empty apartment, like saying it slower would make it mean something different. No genetic relationship detected. My first thought, and I mean my actual, immediate, unedited first thought, was that I'd mixed up sample tubes, that I'd somehow swapped labels, or the lab made an error, or this entire company was one of those services that gets sued eventually for shoddy science. I'd read horror stories online about mismatched kits. This had to be that. It had to be. I didn't tell anyone that night. I just sat on my kitchen floor with my phone in my lap, staring at a percentage next to my dad's name that read 0% shared DNA, feeling something crack quietly in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. I didn't sleep much, so by 6 the next morning I'd already emailed the company's support line, then found a private genetic counselor 2 towns over who could do an independent, clinical-grade paternity comparison, something more rigorous than a mail-in kit, something that couldn't be explained away by lab error or bad luck. I told the receptionist it was for medical documentation purposes. I didn't say the real reason. I don't think I could have said it out loud, yet even if I tried. Dad still hadn't opened his own results. He kept saying he'd get to it when I feel like reading about my cholesterol, half joking, the way he does about everything he doesn't actually want to look at directly. I asked him, as casually as I could manage, to send me his raw sample data for a research thing, and he shrugged and said, "Sure, kid, whatever helps." 2 weeks later, I sat alone in my car in the clinic parking lot with an envelope in my hand that I made myself open before I could talk myself out of it. Same result. Cleaner data. No room for lab error this time. Excluded as biological father. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there for a long time listening to my own breathing, staring at 2 words that undid 28 years of certainty in about half a second. The man who taught me to drive stick shift in an empty parking lot, who still calls me kiddo, even though I'm nearly 30, who has a photo of me at my high school graduation as his phone background. That man was, biologically, a stranger. If you've ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about yourself changed in an instant, hit subscribe, because this story only gets harder from here. I didn't tell anyone for 11 days. I know because I counted. 11 days of Sunday dinners where Dad passed me the mashed potatoes and asked if work was treating me okay. 11 days of texting my brother Danny memes like nothing had happened. 11 days of watching my mom load the dishwasher in that specific, methodical way she's done since I was a kid, humming something off-key, completely unaware that the ground under all of us had shifted. It's strange How normal life keeps insisting on continuing when your whole understanding of yourself has quietly rearranged itself. I went to work. I answered emails. I laughed at a joke my coworker made in the break room. And for about 4 seconds I forgot entirely. And then it came rushing back like missing a stare in the dark. The hardest part wasn't the secret itself. It was watching Dad be exactly, achingly Dad the entire time. He fixed the wobbly leg on my kitchen table without me even asking. He left a voicemail just to tell me he saw a dog that looked like the one I had growing up. Every small, ordinary act of love now had a second meaning underneath it that I didn't know how to hold. I started rehearsing conversations in my head that I never had the nerve to start. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not lie to me. Dad, did you know? None of it ever came out. Not for 11 days. It was Danny, of all people, who finally forced my hand. Not because he knew anything, but because he noticed me. You've been weird for like 2 weeks, he said, cornering me in the kitchen while Mom was outside watering the plants. Danny's 4 years younger than me and has never once in his life let something go once he's noticed it. Did something happen with Marcus? My ex, from over a year ago, a safe and boring guess. No, it's not that. Then what? You've barely said anything at dinner. Mom thinks you're mad at her. That last part hit somewhere tender. Mom had seemed different around me lately too. Quieter, watching me a beat too long sometimes, like she could sense something even if she couldn't name it. Parents do that. Or maybe just mine does. I told Danny it was nothing, some work stress, and he didn't fully believe me. But he let it go the way people do when they've decided pushing further will cost more than it's worth. But that conversation lit something under me. I couldn't keep carrying this alone, rehearsing sentences I never said, watching my family from somewhere slightly outside myself. I decided that night I would talk to Mom. Not Dad. Mom first, because whatever this was, she was the only person who could actually have an answer, and because some instinct in me, maybe unfair, maybe not, told me that if there was a truth being kept, it started with her. I asked her to get coffee, just the two of us, on a Tuesday morning when Dad had his standing golf game with the guys from his old job. Neutral ground. No dishes to hide behind. No television to pretend to half watch. She knew something was wrong before I even opened my mouth. Mothers always do. I think, some radar for their kid's face doing something new. She wrapped both hands around her mug like she needed the warmth for something other than the coffee. You've been different, she said, before I could even start. Ever since that spit test thing you had your dad do. Is everything okay? Is it your health? I almost laughed at how close and how far she was from the truth all at once. Mom, I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Whatever it is. Her hands went still around the mug. The DNA test, I said. Dad's not. I couldn't even finish the sentence the first time. I had to start over. There's no biological match between me and Dad. None. I had it verified twice. I watched something in my mother's face give way. Not shock, not confusion, nothing that looked like what are you talking about. It was something closer to relief mixed with dread, the look of someone who has been holding a held breath for so long they've forgotten what it feels like to exhale. Oh, sweetheart, she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Her eyes filled, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, like she could physically hold the next words in. Mom. My own voice cracked. Please, just tell me. She didn't deny it. She didn't ask if I was sure, or suggest a lab error, or do any of the things I'd braced myself for. She just sat there, coffee going cold, 28 years compressed into the silence between us, and finally said the only thing she seemed able to manage in that moment. There's so much you don't know, and none of it, means what you think it means right now. She reached across the table for my hand. I let her take it, even though some part of me wanted to pull away. I need you to know your father loves you, she said, more than anything on this earth. Whatever else I tell you, please don't let that part get lost. I sat there with her hand around mine, staring at a woman I thought I knew completely, realizing there was an entire chapter of my own existence I hadn't even known to ask about. Then tell me, I said. All of it, please. She nodded slowly, wiped her eyes with the edge of her napkin, and took a long breath like she was about to step into water she didn't know the depth of. It started before you were born, she said. Before your dad and I were even. And that's where she stopped, glancing toward the window like she could see Dad's golf game from there, like some part of her still needed permission to keep going. She turned her coffee cup slowly on the table, not drinking it, just needing something to do with her hands. Your dad and I met when I was 22, she said. We fell for each other fast, faster than either of our families thought was smart. But before him, there was someone else. Someone I was with for almost 2 years before your dad and I got together. I felt my stomach tighten. Okay, his name doesn't matter yet, she said, and I could tell she was choosing her words like she was walking across ice. What matters is that things ended badly. Not dramatically, nothing like what you're picturing. He wasn't cruel. He just wasn't ready to be anyone's anything. When I found out I was pregnant, I hadn't seen him in almost 2 months, and your dad and I had just started seeing each other. I sat very still, doing math I didn't want to do. You were already pregnant with me when you and dad got together? She nodded, eyes down. By a matter of weeks. I didn't know it at first, and when I did know, she let out a breath that shook a little. I was scared out of my mind. I was 22, working 2 jobs, and the one person who should have stepped up had already made it clear he wasn't going to. And there was your father, who I'd known less than 2 months, who looked at me like none of it changed anything. Did he know? My voice came out barely above a whisper. When you got together, did he know you were pregnant? My mother's eyes met mine, and there was something steady in them now, something that had clearly been waiting 28 years to be said out loud. Yes, she said. He's known since the very beginning, before you were even born. The coffee shop noise around us, the espresso machine, a stroller while squeaking past, all of it went strange and distant, like I was hearing it through water. Then why? I said, and my voice cracked in a way I hadn't planned. Why did no one ever tell me? My mother reached for my hand again, and this time I didn't pull away, mostly because I didn't have it in me to. That part, she said quietly, is more complicated, and it's not really my story to finish telling. Some of it belongs to your father. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop for almost 40 minutes, air conditioning running, doing nothing but staring at the steering wheel. 28 years. My whole life, rearranged into a timeline I hadn't known existed. A man I'd never met, a mother terrified and alone, and a version of my father who apparently walked into all of it with his eyes open and decided, somehow, that none of it changed what he wanted. That last part should have felt comforting. Mostly, it just made my chest hurt in a different way. I didn't tell Danny anything that week. I told myself it was because I needed to figure out what I even felt before I could explain it to anyone else. But if I'm honest, some smaller, uglier part of me was also scared of what it would do to him. To watch his big sister become, overnight, something slightly different than the sibling he'd grown up next to. It didn't matter how careful I tried to be. Danny's always been sharper than people give him credit for. I made the mistake of leaving my laptop open on the kitchen counter at Mom and Dad's house one Sunday. The genetic counselor's report still pulled up in a browser tab from where I'd been staring at it again, like it might read differently the 4th time. I only stepped away for 2 minutes, long enough to grab a soda from the garage fridge. When I came back, Danny was standing there with the laptop angled slightly toward himself, his face doing something I'd never seen it do before. What, he said slowly, is this? Danny, excluded as biological father. He read it out loud like the words themselves were a foreign language. This says Dad's name. This is about Dad. Close the laptop, I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be, panic climbing up my throat. Please. Not here. But it was already too late. Mom's voice came from the hallway. Everything okay in there? And Danny turned toward it before I could stop him, the laptop still open in his hands like evidence. The next 2 weeks were some of the worst of my life, and not because of any single blow-up. It was quieter and worse than that. It was Danny going cold toward me in a way he'd never been before, short answers, canceled plans, a wall going up between us that I didn't know how to knock down because I didn't fully understand what I'd done wrong except exist inside a truth none of us had asked for. You told Mom before you told me, he said once, the only time he really engaged with it directly, standing in my kitchen with his jacket still on like he wasn't planning to stay. You found out weeks ago, and I had to find it by accident. I didn't know how to say it. I told him, which was true, but it didn't land the way I wanted it to. I'm your brother. I know. Half, he said, and then flinched at his own word before I could. God. Sorry. I don't even know what that word means right now for either of us. That one sentence undid me more than almost anything else in those weeks. Because he was right. Neither of us knew, in that moment, what any of our words meant anymore. Brother, sister, father, All of it suddenly felt like language borrowed from a family I wasn't entirely sure I still belonged to in the way I always had. Mom found out Danny knew within days. Small houses don't keep secrets long, even fractured ones, and I watched something in her expression shift from grief into fear. Fear of what came next. Fear of who else might find out before she and Dad had decided how, or whether, to say anything themselves. I hadn't told Dad. Not yet. And somehow that fact sat heavier in my chest with every day that passed. I started avoiding him without meaning to at first, and then very much on purpose. It began small, declining a Sunday dinner because of work stuff, letting a phone call go to voicemail because I didn't trust my voice not to give something away. But it built quickly into something he couldn't help but notice, because my dad has never in his life been someone who misses when I pull away from him. He called me on a Wednesday night, and I almost didn't pick up, and then some old reflex, 28 years of instinct, made me answer anyway. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice doing that easy, warm thing it always does. "Haven't seen your face in a couple weeks. Everything okay? Your mom's been acting strange too. Come to think of it, you two fighting about something?" "No," I said too fast. "No, we're fine. Just busy. Work's been a lot." There was a pause on the line, not long, but long enough that I knew he didn't believe me. "You know you can tell me anything," he said. "Whatever it is." "I mean that." Something in his voice, steady, patient, completely unaware of the ground shifting under both of us, nearly broke me right there on the phone. I wanted so badly to say I know. "Dad, that's the whole problem. I know you mean that, and I don't know what to do with it anymore." Instead I said, "I know. I'll come by soon, I promise." "I'll hold you to that," he said, and I could hear the smile in it, the same smile he's had my whole life, completely undisturbed by anything he didn't yet know was coming. After I hung up, I sat on my bedroom floor with my back against the bed frame for a long time, phone still warm in my hand, feeling like the worst kind of coward, hiding not because I didn't love him, but because some frightened part of me wasn't sure yet if loving him the way I always had was still allowed. It was almost 3 more weeks before Mom finally sat me down again, this time at my apartment, late on a Thursday night after Dad had gone to bed early with a headache. Or so she told me, though I sometimes wonder now if that was even true, or if it was simply the space she needed to create to finally say the rest. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, not physically, but somewhere deeper, like she'd been carrying something heavy for so long that setting it down was almost as painful as holding it. "I think it's time you knew everything," she said, sitting across from me at my small kitchen table, hands folded like she was praying or bracing. "Not pieces. All of it. Okay," I said, my heart hammering. "Your father proposed to me 2 months after we started dating," she said. "I told him I was pregnant the same week he asked. I was so sure that it would end things. I'd seen how these stories usually go. I was ready for him to leave." She paused, and something in her face softened into an expression I'd never quite seen on her before, something close to awe, even after all these years. "He didn't leave," she said. "He didn't even hesitate the way I expected him to. He said," and I remember this word for word because I've thought about it 1,000 times since. He said, "That baby didn't do anything wrong, and neither did you. I'm not going anywhere." My eyes were already stinging. "He knew from the very start that you weren't his biologically," she continued. "And he made a decision, right then, that it would never matter, not to how he loved you, not to how he raised you, not to anything. He asked me never to tell you, not because he was ashamed, but because he never wanted you to feel like your place in this family was ever, for 1 single second, conditional." "Then why now?" I whispered. "Why did no one ever? Why did I have to find out from a mail-in DNA kit instead of from either of you?" My mother's eyes filled again, and this time she didn't try to hide it. "Because we were cowards," she said simply. "Because it got easier every year to not say it, until it felt like something we could bury instead of something we owed you. We told ourselves we were protecting you. Maybe we were really protecting ourselves." She reached for my hand across the table one more time. "He doesn't know that you know," she added quietly. "Not yet. I wanted you to hear the whole truth from me first, before you two have to face each other with it." I sat there with the full shape of it finally in front of me. Not a scandal, not a lie born out of cruelty, but a quiet, decades-long act of love wrapped so tightly around a fear of losing me that it had somehow curdled into the very secrecy that now threatened to. "I don't know how I'm supposed to feel," I said, more to myself than to her. "You're allowed to feel more than one thing at once," my mother said. "God knows I have, Every day for 28 years. I didn't see Dad for another 5 days after that conversation with Mom, the longest stretch of silence between us in my entire adult life. Part of me was terrified of what I'd say. Part of me was terrified of what he'd see on my face the second he looked at me. During that time, a strange, unexpected thought kept surfacing. The man Mom described, the one whose name I still didn't know. My biological father. I found myself, late at night, typing search terms into my phone I immediately deleted. A name Mom had let slip once, almost by accident, Stephen, and then nothing else. No last name, no photo, no way of knowing if he was even still alive, let alone whether he'd ever wondered about the daughter he walked away from before she was born. I told Danny about that part, mostly because I needed to say it out loud to someone who wasn't Mom. "Are you going to look for him?" Danny asked, careful in a way that told me he was trying hard not to make it weird, and mostly failing. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to know where I came from. Part of me feels like looking for him would be its own kind of betrayal, like it says the man who actually raised me wasn't enough." Danny was quiet for a second. "For what it's worth," he said, "you're still my sister." I said something stupid that day about half. I didn't mean it. I've just been trying to figure out where I fit in all this too. It was the first real crack of warmth between us in weeks, and it mattered more than I think either of us said out loud. The following Sunday, Mom invited me to dinner, and this time she told me plainly, "Your father will be there. I think it's time." I almost didn't go. I sat in my car in their driveway for 10 full minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, rehearsing sentences that all sounded wrong the moment I imagined saying them. Dad was in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, stirring something on the stove like it was any other Sunday. "There she is," he said, smiling the way he always does, and something in my chest folded in on itself. I couldn't do it over dinner. I told myself I would, and then Danny made a joke, and Mom asked about my work project, and the ordinary rhythm of our family swallowed the moment whole the way it always has, the way normal life stubbornly insists on continuing even when everything underneath it has changed. It was afterward, when Dad and I were alone doing dishes, him washing, me drying, the same division of labor we've had since I was 12, that I finally opened my mouth. "Dad," I said, and my voice betrayed me instantly, cracking on one syllable. "I need to tell you something. I already know. About the DNA thing." Mom told me everything. His hands went still in the sink water. He didn't turn around right away, and for a second I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe this wasn't the moment. Maybe I should have waited for. "I've been waiting 28 years for this conversation," he said quietly, finally turning to face me, his hands dripping soap onto the floor neither of us moved to clean up. "And now that it's here, I don't know a single thing to say that doesn't sound like an excuse." That conversation, the first real one, went badly. Not because either of us was cruel, but because we were both too raw, too unrehearsed, too many years of unspoken things trying to force themselves through a doorway too small for all of it at once. "You should have told me," I said, my voice rising in a way I didn't expect. "Not when I was 28 and blindsided by a mail-in kit. When I was old enough to understand." "You had years, Dad. Years." "I know," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I'd never heard from him before, not once in my entire life. "I know I should have. I told myself every year it would be easier the next year, and every year I was wrong, and eventually I think I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "That you'd look at me different," he said. "That you'd start seeing me as some guy who raised somebody else's kid, instead of just your dad. That the second you knew, something between us would change that I couldn't get back." "Something already changed," I said, and immediately regretted how sharp it came out, watching it land on his face like a slap. "Because I found out from a stranger's lab report instead of from you." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, looking older in that moment than I think I'd ever actually seen him. "You're right," he said. "I don't have a defense for that. I just have love, and apparently that wasn't enough of a reason to be honest." I left that night without resolving anything. Both of us hurt in ways that felt, for the first time in my life, unfamiliar between us. The next few weeks were quiet in a way that felt heavier than the loud parts had been. I didn't avoid Dad exactly, but we were careful with each other, polite in a way we'd never had to be before, like two people circling something breakable. It was a small moment, almost by accident, that cracked things back open. I stopped by the house on a Tuesday to grab a tool I'd left there, and Dad was in the garage, going through an old box of photographs Mom had been meaning to sort for years. He didn't hear me come in at first. I watched him for a second, just watched him hold up a photo, look at it a long time, then set it carefully in a small separate pile. "What's that pile?" I asked. He startled, then held one up for me to see. It was me, maybe 4 years old, sitting on his shoulders at some county fair I didn't remember, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. "These are the ones I go back to," he said quietly, "when I need reminding." Reminding of what? He set the photo down carefully, like it might bruise. That it was never about biology for me. Not for one single day. I used to worry, still worry, honestly, that someday you'd think all those years, all those memories, were somehow less real because of where you came from. I kept these photos separate because I guess some part of me wanted proof. For myself, maybe. That it happened. That it was real. That I really was your dad. Even if a piece of paper says otherwise. I sat down on the cold garage floor next to him without really deciding to. And for a long moment neither of us said anything. "I was never trying to replace anyone," he said eventually. "I didn't even know there was anyone to replace. Not really. Just a man who wasn't going to show up. I just knew, the second your mom told me, that I wanted to be the one who did." We talked for real 2 days later, sitting on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee neither of us really drank, no dishes to hide behind, no photographs between us, just 2 people finally willing to be honest with each other. "I'm not asking you to pretend the last few months didn't hurt," he said. "They did. I know that. I just need you to know that not one day of my life with you ever felt like an obligation. Not one single day. I believe you," I said, and I found, somewhat to my own surprise, that I meant it completely. I think what hurt wasn't finding out you weren't my biological father. It was feeling like I didn't get to choose how I found out. Like something that big about my own life got decided for me by other people for 28 years, without me even knowing there was a decision being made. "That's fair," he said. "That's completely fair. And I'm sorry. Truly. Not because I'm not your father. Because I let fear keep something from you that was always yours to know. We didn't solve everything on that porch. I still don't know, some days, exactly how to hold all of it. The love that's always been real alongside the years of silence that weren't fair to me. The questions I still have about a man named Steven I may never meet. The strange new shape of brother that Danny and I are still learning how to wear. But something between my father and me settled that evening in a way it hadn't since the day I opened that DNA report on my kitchen floor. Months later, on an ordinary Saturday, Dad and I stood in that same driveway where he once taught me to ride a bike. Working on the same wobbly kitchen table leg, he can never quite get to stop wobbling for good. He handed me the screwdriver without a word, the way he has 100 times before, and I took it without a word back, and for a few minutes neither of us said anything at all. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scene from a movie where everything gets tied up neatly. It was just 2 people, quietly doing something ordinary together, the way we always have, the way I hope we always will. I still don't fully know how to process all of it. The 28 years of not knowing. The truth that came from a mail-in envelope instead of the people who loved me enough to be afraid of it. I don't think that particular ache fully goes away. Maybe it isn't supposed to. But I've come to understand something I don't think I ever would have without all of this. Family was never really about the paper that says who belongs to whom. It's about who shows up, year after year, wobbly table leg after wobbly table leg, choosing you again and again, long after they ever had to. Some truths don't erase what was real. They just ask you to hold both at once.